The clock on the wall read 1:47 p.m. when old Antonio pushed open the door of the small restaurant on the corner. The sound of the iron bell echoed, and for an instant, all eyes turned to him. His clothing was simple, his coat worn, his hat faded. He walked with difficulty, leaning on an improvised wooden cane. The air felt heavy, as if his every step carried the weight of forgotten decades. Antonio sat down slowly at a table in the corner. He looked at the menu hopefully. A plate of rice, beans, and meat cost $32. He put his hands in his pocket and took out some coins. $4.85. It was all I had. He looked around shyly, trying not to attract attention, but the waiter watched him with contempt. "Are you going to order something, or are you just going to sit there?" he asked, his tone dry and impatient. Antonio took a deep breath. "I wanted a simple dish. Can I pay later?" he replied, his voice low. The waiter laughed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This isn't shelter, old man. If you don't have money, you don't eat," people at nearby tables whispered. A woman shook her head in embarrassment. A boy laughed, finding it funny. The old man lowered his eyes and stared at the coins on the table. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Outside, the cold wind blew hard. Antonio straightened his coat, picked up his hat and began to get up, silently. But before he could take the first step, the restaurant door burst open. 5 soldiers in uniform marched in. The sound of boots echoed across the wooden floor. Everyone fell silent, and then one of them, a young man with a steady gaze, fixed his eyes on the old man. "Mr. Antonio?" he asked in a surprised tone. The veteran turned around, confused. "It's me, yes," he replied. The soldier straightened his posture. "Gentlemen, please stand with respect," he shouted, his voice commanding. In a synchronized movement, the 5 saluted. The entire restaurant fell silent. The waiter froze. The manager, who was at the counter, didn't understand what was happening. The soldier approached, moved. "This man here was the one who saved my platoon over 30 years ago. If I'm alive today," he said, his voice breaking, "it's because of that hero." The silence turned to astonishment. People dropped their cutlery, looking at the old man in disbelief. The waiter took a step back, pale. Antonio, with tears in his eyes, just murmured, "I just wanted to eat a plate of rice and beans." And it was then that the soldier responded firmly, "Today you pay nothing. Today, the nation pays its debt." His name was Antonio Noguera, but no one had called him that for a long time. To the neighborhood, he was just the old man with the cane. He lived in a small room at the back of an old boarding house where the walls were cold and the ceiling leaked on rainy nights. His bed was a thin mattress covered with a faded sheet. At the headboard, a wooden box held everything that remained from the past. 2 rusty medals, a yellowed photo, and a faded piece of cloth, the crest of his former unit. Antonio woke early every day. At 6 a.m., the sound of the old radio broke the silence, broadcasting a newscast. He got up slowly, put on his coat, and looked out the window. Outside, the city followed its usual rhythm. Honking horns, hurried footsteps, people with headphones on. But no one noticed the man with the distant gaze, who observed everything as if he were observing the world without being a part of it anymore. The past came back in flashes. The sound of explosions, the smell of smoke, the screams of his comrades. Sometimes he still woke up sweating, imagining he was on the battlefield. In war, he had been a hero, brave, loyal, fearless. But in peace, he became just a forgotten name in some military archive. Antonio had once been invited to parade in a veterans ceremony. But when he got there, he realized the spotlight was on the politicians and generals in ties. He, a simple soldier who gave everything he had, was at the back of the line, almost invisible. That day, I understood what it meant to be forgotten by the very country he swore to protect. His health was no longer the same. His knee, injured in combat, never recovered. The pain was constant, but he refused to depend on help. With his meager pension, he could barely pay the rent and buy medicine. I often skipped meals to save money. Others spent the whole day walking the streets, trying to remember where in the world things were held. Even so, there was something noble in his gaze, something that time, pain, and misery couldn't erase. When he saw a child pass by in their school uniform, he smiled. When he saw a flag fluttering in the wind, he put his hand to his chest, an almost automatic gesture. It was as if a part of him still believed that yesterday's sacrifice was worth it. And it was precisely this silent faith that led him to the restaurant that day. Antonio didn't want a handout. I didn't want pity. He just wanted to feel human again. To sit down, order a simple dish, and remember, even if only for a moment, what it was like to be part of the world. But fate, relentless, had other plans. What was supposed to be just an ordinary meal was about to become the most memorable day of his life. A day when shame would turn to honor, when oblivion would be replaced by remembrance, and when the old soldier would once again be the hero he always was, in the eyes of everyone. The restaurant was small, cozy, lit by yellow lamps hanging from the wooden ceiling. The smell of fresh food filled the air, mixed with the buzz of conversation and the sound of cutlery hitting plates. But the welcoming environment would soon become the stage for a scene that no one would ever forget. Antonio sat at one of the tables in the corner, away from the windows. He held the menu carefully, as if that piece of paper represented something greater, the simple desire to belong somewhere again. But the waiter, a young, arrogant man, watched him impatiently. "Are you going to order something, or are you waiting for someone?" he asked, crossing his arms. Antonio looked up shyly. "I would like a simple dish. Just rice and beans if possible." The waiter laughed. "Just rice and beans? This isn't a public cafeteria, sir." Laughter spread across the nearby tables. A woman hid her laughter by putting her hand over her mouth. A man commented quietly, "I bet you don't even have money to pay." Antonio, with trembling hands, took the coins out of his pocket. They clinked on the table, small, insufficient. The waiter looked at the coins and then at him with a mocking smile. "Do you think this pays anything?" "I can come back later, when I receive my pension," the old man replied, almost whispering. The boy laughed out loud. Of course. We offer credit to everyone who shows up here with a cane and talks about pensions." He turned to the other customers and, in a mocking tone, added, "Do you want me to take note of the veteran's request?" His tone held contempt. The word veteran sounded like an insult. Antonio lowered his head, trying to hide the shame that burned his face. Inside, a whirlwind of memories hit him. The sound of gunfire, the desert heat, the weight of carrying wounded comrades in his arms. He had faced real enemies before, but nothing prepared him for the cold of human contempt. The manager, a man in a cheap suit and an arrogant look, approached. "What's the problem here, Gustavo?" he asked the waiter. "This gentleman wants to eat without paying. He says he's a veteran," the young man replied, laughing. The manager analyzed Antonio from head to toe. "Look, old man, we respect everyone, but this isn't a shelter. If you don't have any money, you need to leave." Silence fell over the restaurant. Antonio tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. The lump in my throat tightened. He got up slowly, with difficulty, leaning on his cane. The sound of metal hitting the floor echoed, heavy, painful. As he turned to leave, someone at the next table whispered, "He must be one of those people who makes up war stories to gain pity from others." That sentence was the final blow. Antonio stopped for a moment, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. The heart was beating fast. He felt anger rising, mixed with shame. But he just muttered, "I fought, so that no one would have to go through this," and he left. Slowly, with the dignity of someone who had already lost everything, except his pride. The waiter laughed mockingly. "Go on, hero. Good luck with your coin feast." His laughter echoed through the hall until the door closed behind the veteran. For a few seconds, the restaurant remained silent. But fate had not yet finished writing that scene, because in a few minutes, Justice would walk through the same door, dressed in uniform. The sound of the door opening interrupted the waiter's laughter. The cold wind from the street invaded the restaurant, along with a metallic echo, the rhythmic tapping of boots against the wooden floor. The customers immediately fell silent. There was something about their presence, a silent authority and invisible weight, that made everyone straighten their backs. The waiter hurried to ask, "Good afternoon, gentlemen. How many people are there at a table?" He tried to sound friendly, though still with the arrogant tone of someone who had been mocking him a moment earlier. The taller soldier, his expression hardened, ignored him. His gaze scanned the room until it settled on old Antonio, who had not yet managed to leave the restaurant completely. He had his back turned, ready to push the door open with his cane. 5 men entered in uniform with serious expressions and firm gazes. The soldier took a step forward. "Sir, is it really you?" he asked, his voice trembling. Antonio turned around slowly. For an instant, time seemed to freeze. The soldier swallowed hard. His eyes sparkled with emotion. "I don't believe it," he murmured. "Is that Sergeant Antonio Noguera?" The old man frowned in surprise. "Yes, but how do you know my name?" The soldier stood at attention. "Lord, you saved me. Battle of Serra Alta, 1993. I was just a recruit. You stayed behind to get us out of enemy fire. That day, you carried me on your shoulders, even though I was injured." The waiter's eyes widened. The manager, confused, stepped forward. The customers looked at each other, stunned. "What?" A woman at the next table murmured. "This man saved soldiers?" The soldier continued, his voice breaking. "Sir, I have never forgotten your face. And I will never forget what you said when we were surrounded. As long as I breathe, no man of mine is left behind." The silence that formed was almost palpable. The waiter looked at the floor, not knowing what to do. The manager tried to hide his nervousness by running his hand through his hair. The soldier made a gesture. Immediately the other four lined up behind him, and then in a firm voice he ordered, "In position." All the soldiers saluted the veteran. The dry sound of hands hitting uniforms echoed like thunder inside the restaurant. People stood up, some emotional, others trying to hold back tears. Antonio, with tears in his eyes, simply said, I just wanted a plate of rice and beans." The younger soldier smiled, containing his emotion. "You'll have a lot more than that today, Sergeant. Lunch is on us, and respect. You earned that a long time ago." One of the customers stood up and started applauding. Soon the entire restaurant joined in applause. The waiter, embarrassed, lowered his head. The manager tried to approach, mumbling something, but the soldier interrupted him. "Respect. It's the least this man deserves." Antonio sat down again, still dazed. But now, he was no longer alone. The soldiers pulled up chairs, sat with him, and ordered the best dishes in the house. The waiter, trembling, wrote down the order without looking up. That old man, who minutes before was a source of laughter, was now the center of all admiration. And in that instant, time seemed to give back to Antonio everything it had taken from him. The honor, respect, and place from which it should never have been forgotten. The entire restaurant was silent, except for the sound of clapping that echoed like thunder within the walls. Some customers filmed the scene with tears in their eyes. Others just watched, stunned, trying to process what they were witnessing. The waiter, the same one who had called Antonio a broke old man, was paralyzed. His pale face betrayed belated regret. The manager, realizing he had lost control of the situation, tried to regain his tone of authority. "Gentlemen, please, we don't need to exaggerate. Antonio, is that it? I apologize for the misunderstanding." But his voice wavered. Each word seemed weaker than the last. The younger soldier stood up slowly, looking him in the eyes. "Misunderstanding?" he repeated, his tone firm and icy. "You threw out a war hero like a beggar." The manager tried to laugh nervously. "No, you see, I didn't know." "That's the point," the soldier interrupted. "You didn't want to know. And that's what makes it small." The audience began to murmur in agreement. A woman who had previously laughed was now crying. A man who had whispered insults looked at the ground, embarrassed. The atmosphere that minutes before had been filled with contempt now overflowed with regret. The waiter approached slowly, his hands trembling. "Sir, forgive me. I didn't know." Antonio looked at him, and the silence seemed to swallow the air. The old man took a deep breath and replied in a calm but heavy voice, "Son, when I was your age, I learned what respect is. I learned that dignity is not measured by clothes, nor by pocket, but by the heart." The waiter lowered his head, tears streaming discreetly. The manager tried to hide his shame, wiping the sweat from his face. One of the soldiers stood up and placed something on Antonio's table, a small black box with the army coat of arms engraved in gold. Antonio looked at her confused. The soldier opened the box. Inside was a medal, shiny, intact, with the name Sergeant Antonio Noguera engraved in low relief. "Sir, this medal was given to the army years ago, but it never reached you. Today we bring it to you personally, as a symbol of eternal gratitude." The entire restaurant held its breath. Antonio reached out his trembling hands and touched the metal. A tear ran down his wrinkled face. The soldier then stood at attention again and in a firm voice declared, "For the country, for honor, for the man who taught us the true meaning of courage." The applause returned, louder, more emotional. This time even the manager joined them, crying silently. The waiter took the order that was ready and with trembling hands placed it in front of Antonio. "Here it is, sir. Please, it's on the house." The old man looked at the plate and smiled humbly. "It's not about the dish, son. It's about respect." The soldiers sat beside him, and together they ate lunch like brothers in arms. The food steamed on the table, but the real warmth came from the recognition that had finally been restored. As they ate, the customers approached one by one, shaking the old man's hand. Some left notes on the table, others just whispered, "Thank you, hero." And that afternoon, in that small, forgotten restaurant in the middle of the city, justice was served without courts, without judges, without laws, only with the power of truth and respect that should never have been lost. As the sun began to set, a beam of light passed through the restaurant's glass and landed on Antonio's metal. The golden glow reflected on the walls as if time itself paid homage to that silent man, forgotten by many, but remembered at that moment as a true symbol of courage. The soldiers stood up one by one and saluted. Antonio responded with the same firm stance as decades ago. Even with his tired body, there was something unshakable in his gaze, a flame that time could not extinguish. Silence fell again, and it was then that the youngest of the soldiers said something that would echo forever. "Heroes don't wear capes, they wear scars." These words swept through the restaurant like a holy wind. Some customers cried, others simply stood there, unable to say anything. Because deep down they all knew, each of them had already judged someone without knowing their story. At that moment, the manager approached with his head lowered. "Mr. Antonio, I learned a lesson that I will never forget. From today onwards, no one will be mistreated in this place anymore. You taught me more than any book could." Antonio smiled. "It's not about teaching, son. It's about remembering what really matters: respect. It is the first uniform that every human being should wear." The soldiers said goodbye, leaving the restaurant in silence. Antonio stood there for a few minutes, looking at the street. The wind swayed the country's flag in the distance, and for a brief moment, the old man was once again the young soldier who had once marched for it. Before leaving, he turned to the waiter and said, "Son, a plate of food can satisfy your hunger, but one act of kindness can feed the world." The waiter, with tears in his eyes, replied, "Thank you, sir. You've changed the way I see people." Antonio then took his cap, fixed it on his head, and left. Outside, the sun was setting slowly, tinting the sky with orange hues, and in that sunset, it seemed as if the world itself bowed before him. The restaurant was never the same again. Days later, a painting was hung on the main wall. In it, a photograph of Antonio smiling, holding his medal. Below the image, a sign read, "Here, we serve respect before the meal."